Check, check. You guys hear me? Great. Well, welcome everybody. I know it was just had lunch, so hopefully we can keep you kind of awake and animated and all the rest of it, interested. So welcome to Windows 10 for mobile devices from the support trenches. My name is David Alessi.
And I'm Mike Donosky.
So we've been supporting enterprise customers who are deploying Windows Phone 8 today. So they're deploying Windows Phone, they're deploying MDM, the whole mobile device management scenario, a lot of evaluations, proof of concepts, demoing to customers. I mean, this is something that everyone's kind of thinking about, looking into. We're in the very early stages of this whole MDM scenario that's going on right now. So quick question for you guys. Who is already a Windows insider? A couple of you?
Great. You guys are running the Windows 10 preview on phone? Was? Okay.
Yeah, it's not great for your only device right now. We'll be the first ones to admit.
So like Dave said, we're Windows Phone, third-tier escalation out of Texas, Las Colinas, Texas. If some of you have run into some issues and have opened a CSS ticket and it was escalated, it's likely you've already worked with us or seen some of our public content out on Microsoft Virtual Academy, Business Mobility Center, and places like that. But really what it boils down to, our job is to help customers do more with Microsoft solutions. In our specific case, you're not going to be doing a whole lot if your solution is broken. And especially if you're getting ready to roll out and you're really trying to roll out these productivity devices and get rolling and using Windows Phone, not working is not a good situation to be in. The other side of our job is to drive meaningful change back into the product. So one of our huge trends right now is listening to the customer, listening to you guys, taking your feedback, and then driving that back into the product. A lot of the times that comes through social media and things like that, and the big things like the start button. But other times it's things that we'll show you here today that we've actually been able to influence a product based on support calls, making it a much more easy to support solution, whether it's from the MDM side or from the device itself. So we'll show you some things that we worked on there and some things that are going to make supporting phone much easier. Something important. If you guys are using Windows Phone in the enterprise, MDM shouldn't be a new acronym to you. Everyone's talking about mobile device management, especially in mobile devices. Anything that's not domain joined. Is this a new concept to anyone? It's okay if you're shy and don't want to raise your hand, but it's been the trend the past few years, and we're only going to see it growing. And moving towards Windows 10, we're going to see it also come into the client space for desktop, basically any non-classic domain joined device. And so we want to do a quick primer here on how it works, because in order to find out how to fix something, in order to understand our stories about how stuff is breaking, we'd like to just do a quick demo or a quick presentation on how MDM works in the back end.
Right, so we're going to start with how it works, go over a little bit of the details, a little bit of what's kind of happening under the covers, and then we'll go into what it looks like when it's working, and then
when it breaks.
What it looks like when it breaks and how to get around that. This isn't going to be flashy demos today, guys. This is going to be practical stuff that we see customers using, that we see broken. If you want the flashy stuff, they've shown a ton of really cool presentations in the keynotes and all that kind of stuff. It's all online, so you can check that out. But today we wanted to go over the stuff that we see customers using every day, the stuff that they have questions about, and the stuff that they have trouble with. So it all starts with the OMA DM standard. There are going to be a lot of acronyms today. We're going to try to keep it light, but bear with me. So OMA DM stands for Open Mobile Alliance Device Management. So Open Mobile Alliance is an organization that maintains different standards for the tech industry, this being one of many. The reason this one is so important is because it's supported by a ton of platforms. That's Android, iOS, Windows 10 is coming to support this as well. So with one central management solution, you can manage all these different types of devices, regardless of where they are, what they are. It's an XML-based format, and we have an example here right now. So I know even if you just walked in, this is probably getting a little deep pretty quick. Not asking you to remember much of this. Really, the only thing I want you to look at are the two things in red. The first thing, it's under URI there. So it starts with ./vendor, but the important part is where it says require device encryption. All right, and now at the bottom, you'll see under data, it has the character 1. So we're basically pointing at require device encryption, setting it to 1. Pretty straightforward. So when we're on our MDM server, we're hitting yes on the policy and the UI. On the back end, the server is writing this up, sending it to the device, and then the device is processing it, turning on device encryption in this case. It does get more complicated, though. So we've kind of taken out all the stuff that isn't as important, and we're just looking at the data and the unique resource identifier. So that URI at the top, again, it should look a little bit familiar. It starts with /vendor. But the end is different, right? We're targeting a different piece of the device this time. We're targeting the application restriction piece. Down below, this section in the previous slide was just a 1. But we can also have, in this example, an entire XML here if we're getting really deep into a custom setting. And in this example, we're showing you denying certain apps, denying publishers. If you guys have ever used AppLocker before in group policy, pretty similar concept, but we're doing it to Windows Phone devices, Windows 10 devices. So why is this important? So this is important because whenever we have a device that has a feature on it, we're targeting these features with the OMA-DM standard. If it's on the back end, if we're writing it ourselves, it doesn't matter. Once it gets to the device, that's how we're actually making these changes. So when Windows 10 hits, not every MDM vendor is going to have time to get every single Windows Phone feature, Windows 10 feature into their console. But if you know a little bit about this and you kind of look at some of the resources that we're going to share with you guys, we definitely don't expect you to memorize all of this. But we have some resources we're going to point you at. If you can use the resources and you have a very basic understanding, any feature in Windows 10 for MDM, you're going to be able to unlock day 1, which is very powerful. And this is what we see a lot of our customers using. So to configuration service providers, this is what we're targeting with that URI, or that unique resource identifier. So that part where we saw /vendor, blah, blah, blah. That's how we're pointing at a CSP. The CSP is the device-side mechanism that's reading the XML and then actually enacting that change on the phone. So whether it's flipping a reg key, turning off a service, disabling a driver, whatever it needs to do, the CSP knows how to take that command from the server and then implement it on the device.
And Dave mentioned this is going to be our direction moving forward. How many of you guys saw Brad's keynote on Monday where he's showing all the cool enterprise data protection stuff, where the metadata is actually on the file and it's whether it's corporate or personal? Whenever a new feature like that is being built in Windows from now on, there's going to be a coinciding CSP that's going to control that. So similar to what we used to see with group policy, where we have a new feature and then we add group policies on how to go ahead and change that and modify it. This is all moving towards CSPs. And as Dave mentioned, this is incredibly important. If you guys are running the desktop version of Windows 10 right now, we're already putting documentation out there on what CSPs are in the current build. And so each build that comes out, there will be more CSPs, configuration service providers, that you can then target with a management service and go ahead and test them out or use them for demos if you're interested in selling the product.
Right. So on Windows Phone 8.1, we have a ton of MDM features right now, today, lit up through these CSPs that we're talking about. These same CSPs on Windows Phone are moving to the Windows 10 platform. And that's not just Win 10 for mobile, it's Win 10 for laptops, Win 10 for desktops. As you guys heard, it's all the same code. It's going to be the same on every platform. It's just going to scale depending on the form factor. And so with CSPs, with MDM, you're going to be able to manage all of these devices with one management solution. All right.
So, go ahead.
So, what does MDM look like when it's working? We have a few customer scenarios, just 2, that we get asked about all the time. Very common, but also pretty impactful. So we want to show you guys the stuff that customers are using today, how to get it working today, and then where they go wrong. So I think the first one is about data protection. You want to take this one, Mike?
Yes, of course. So it seems like every week there's a new story about whether it's a personal storage being hacked or leaked or phished online. Data leakage is in the news every day. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, Brad's demo with enterprise data protection, that's one of the steps we're taking. But we want to show you what we've seen customers using to sort of develop a suite of policies to go against this exact scenario. So we have Fabricam Manufacturing. This is just a scenario to give you sort of why they want to put these security policies on a device. They have a new contract to manufacture devices. Any leakage of pictures, specifications, any other information could lead to hefty fines, loss of contract, criminal charges, things like that, depending on their agreement. And so while security is paramount in this situation, they also want to leverage mobility for the productivity that they can give to their users. So what kind of settings are we going to look at here? Of course, first there's the obvious ones. These need to be password protected. These need to be encrypted. For authentication, for all the different VPN profiles, Wi-Fi profiles, maybe for accessing applications, we're going to use certificates instead of having username and password. In this case, specifically, we're going to use assigned access. Have you guys heard of assigned access before? Show of hands, maybe just a little wave. It's sort of like a kiosk mode. And so what it does is it allows you to remove certain parts of the UI, only specify which apps you want in the UI, take out different settings, stuff like that. So we'll show you what that's going to look like. And then, of course, controlling network access. So through these settings, you can actually deploy Wi-Fi profiles to the device so that you're mandating which network connections these devices are connecting over. And then you can also use a custom URI setting, since it's not in the UI yet, since this was an update that was added to phone, to actually make it so that you can't connect to any other Wi-Fi network other than the one that you specify in your managed profile. This is incredibly powerful and is a requirement for many of the customers that we work with in these secure situations. Of course, VPN profiles can be delivered in the same way. These can be customized. You can use always on in some of the new updates so that all of the traffic in the device you can be sure is encrypted going through VPN. Disabling Bluetooth is another huge piece of feedback that we got. Some companies wanted to still leave Bluetooth on, but disable the ability to share files through Bluetooth. So in some of the updates, we're seeing new features where you can do sort of that more granular control in disabling what can be shared over Bluetooth, but you can still use audio and things like that. Localized security, disabling the SD card. That is not new. That's actually a policy that was enabled through Exchange ActiveSync mailbox policy in the past. Turning off NFC, disabling copy-paste. So in the EDP demo that Brad had on Monday, you saw disabling copy-paste in a very granular level where you can't take it from this app to another app. That's through managed applications, but on Windows Phone, you can actually disable it throughout. So the little UI with the clipboard where you can copy just doesn't even come up. And of course, disabling the camera for this scenario specifically so we're not leaking the next new device specifications from a factory overseas. And then there's the cloud piece of it. A phone, by nature, is generally connected to the cloud. You have OneDrive backup. You have all these great cloud services that add productivity, but in certain situations, you don't really want that. So that's why we have Enlightened Apps, which, again, was demoed on Monday, and network resource access, so specifying maybe there's an app that needs to always go through VPN when it gets its data, but you don't want anything else to go through VPN. So there's a lot of customization here so you can actually take a device that was built to work in the cloud and sort of lock down some of those features so that it fits your security guidelines. We're going to go ahead. Oh, yes. And what? Yes. Mm-hmm.
And when disabling all the things, also to disable the cloud, being the OneDrive, it turned out that I could not use the local file selector anymore.
You're using an application whitelist?
Yes.
OK, so we're going to get into app restrictions in the next scenario, but there are some key caveats. Did you guys open a support case?
Yes, I finally got the hidden URID.
Yes. So the guidance that we recommend with whitelists, unless it is a very, very secure lockdown, it's always a good idea to allow Microsoft Corporation because there's an allow list that you can do and then deny specific apps. So if you have a reason, so if you want to deny OneDrive, you can allow Microsoft Corporation and then deny the GUIDs that you don't want in there because there are situations where there's maybe a Silverlight app that does a task in the background. And if you disable Microsoft through the application's restrictions, you can actually put yourself in situations where you can't do file.
Yeah, but nevertheless, I always have to run with
Yeah, yeah. So it does take a lot of testing, and support cases are definitely, so we have worked with some people in the audience. That's good to hear. And there's 2 cases for that, actually, that I'll share. So there's the one, and we're working on publication for that one in particular, where there is a hidden app that does file saving. There's another one that handles IE pinning. So if you're using IE and you're on a web page and you want to pin it to the home screen, you actually, that's handled by a behind-the-scenes app that if it's not on your allow list, pinning will actually fail. One other thing to note, speaking of deployment stories, at the end of our session, if someone has a good deployment story, a success story of deploying Windows devices with MDM, feel free to get up and share it on the microphone when we're done and get to the questions, and you could win an HP Stream 7.
Very cool.
Sorry for those listening online.
Not much we can do there. Anyway, so let's get straight into the demo. If I can find my desktop, okay.
Great.
How's that look? Pretty good?
If you guys haven't seen Intune in a while, this probably looks new, and by a while I mean November. This product is always changing. As a cloud service, we can update it very quickly, and if you haven't seen this in a little while, I definitely recommend going and taking a look at it. If you go to the Intune overview page, in the top right, you can do try now and start a trial for 30 days with 100 users. On Yammer, if you do hashtag BRK2301, which is this session, I've actually pasted links already to all the reference documents we'll be talking about today.
All right, so let's get right into using Intune to set up some of these policies. So I'll go ahead and go to Add. If you go to Common Mobile Device Settings, we'll be able to create and deploy a policy with recommended settings. So we can fire up an Intune tenant with the Intune trial. We can go here, create a recommended policy, and get that deployed to devices in probably 10, 15 minutes. So very easy to go ahead and just configure this. We can pick some users to go ahead and deploy this to. And then I'll show you what it looks like. Let's see if I can find it. Here we go.
And so you can think about that as in the background with every box he just clicked, is building the XML that's being deployed to these devices.
So you'll see here we're starting to get through our policies. So if we kind of refresh your memory back to the point where we were looking at the XMLs, kind of all these checkboxes are just writing in values and targeting them towards CSPs. So there's kind of a device lock CSP, and then within that, we can target, is the password allowed or not, or is it enforced or not, how many characters, alphanumeric. Again, these are just all pieces of that CSP architecture that we were talking about earlier. So in this example specifically, this is just the basic policy. So this is going to come when you've configured the one recommended. I'm actually going to show you the one that we have deployed today. So that one is just deployed, and I'll show you the one that we've already have deployed. Ignite Lockdown. So we've pretty much just done things that Mike has already spoken about. So require encryption, disabling screen capture. I'm going a little bit quickly. Most of these are off. We're disabling the camera, disabling SD card here.
Something I want to note here is a lot of times we get customers who you start using Intune for the first time, and especially with the configuration management side of it, it doesn't have these sections that say for Windows Phone 8.1, iOS 6 Plus. This is basically telling you, okay, there is a CSP on this device that uses this setting. Some of these you won't see, like allow removable storage on iPhone, because of course there's no removable storage. And in ConfigMan, what you have to do is when you get to the end, there's a list that will tell you which settings are applicable to which devices when you select which devices you want to use. We have gotten support calls on this because it can be confusing if you do something like allow removable storage, and then you go through and look at your reporting, and it says that your iOS devices aren't conforming.
Exactly. Good point, Mike. All right, so nothing too revolutionary there. We're just kind of going through the UI, setting up different policies. Some of you can all do on your own. Just read the policies, turn them off or on, look what devices they're applicable to, and see what's going to be working for your scenario. Now, we're going to go into some of that OMA DM stuff. So here I have a policy to disable Bluetooth sharing. So you'll see what I've done. I've named it Disable Bluetooth Sharing. I've added a OMA URI setting. And this should start to be looking familiar for some of you. We have the ./vendor/MSFT. And then at the end, we have allow Bluetooth sharing. We are setting it to 0. So we are disabling Bluetooth sharing from the UI. So if you go to a device, open a document or something, and went to share, Bluetooth would not be there for these devices. So we can still enable our users to use things like headsets, keyboards, that kind of Bluetooth stuff. But as far as file sharing, that's going to be disabled in this scenario.
And you want to show where to go ahead and create that policy?
I do.
Something to note is when you go in to create a policy, right now this is under Windows, and in the future we'll see separation for Windows 8 and Windows 10. So it's still going to be there. We can still deploy custom policies, but in a later Intune update that will be split out.
All right, so this is where we would create the policy. Give it a
Looks
name.
the same. Yep.
Just showed it to you guys, and then we specify our setting name, our OMA URI, or that unique resource identifier targeting the CSP, and then, of course, data type, whether it's a string, a value, Boolean, all that sort of stuff.
And that is another call generator we'll get is, since it's so customizable, it's very easy to mess up. Just like the UI says, the OMA URI string itself is case sensitive. And just the smallest detail in the data that the device doesn't know how to handle, it'll send back an error.
Right, so something else I want to show you guys is...
Where do I get these strings from? So I had this
Great question.
case that I wanted to enable USB,
Mm-hmm.
but I want to force the user to have, or I want to enforce the setting that the user has to be asked before. And in the last protocol, in MDM protocol for the XML, I didn't find the setting.
OK, so the question is, to repeat it, is where do you find the specific settings? For that specific one, I'm not sure if that made it into the final build, into the product. That's something we could check up. If you want to get our contact info after, we can help you find that. But we actually publish a MDM, Enterprise Device Protocol. This is essentially written for our MDM partners like AirWatch, VMware, AirWatch, MobileIron, anyone who's essentially making MDM product to work with our devices. And so this is where you'll actually go. There's a nice big blue table in here that will show you all of the different CSPs that are on the device. And it'll also give you OMA DM examples. If you're using Intune, like we just showed you, all you need is the string, the data type, and the data itself that you want to send. If you're using AirWatch, they actually require that you have the formatted XML.
Right.
The SyncML, rather.
All right, so here we are. It's really just a quick search for Windows Phone 8.1 MDM protocol documentation, but we've linked to this in that Yammer conversation.
Yep.
So it's all there. And using this document is kind of, where you can learn and where you can find references for everything that we're showing you today. So again, not asking you to memorize all this XML stuff. We just want you to know this is the document where you can get the XMLs and get the examples and read about how it works. And then we want to show you what it looks like when you're actually taking stuff from the document, putting it into Intune, and then deploying it to a device.
And a lot of our TSPs and knowledge generation people are taking snippets of this, making it much more readable as a walkthrough, and you'll start seeing that in the Windows 10 timeframe as well. As we start lighting up new features, we'll be having walkthroughs on sort of how to do each of these settings instead of just throwing you into the ocean of CSPs.
Right. And the white paper also has a lot of examples of these features. So, for example, here's an example of assigned access, which we're just about to show you guys. Something that we've used ourselves to help construct demos and get customers working. So, assigned access, we were just talking about it. I'll go ahead and show you guys how we deployed it. So you'll see quite a bit of text in there. Let me make this into a little bit more readable format.
Great.
Let Mike go through that with you guys.
So I'll go ahead and talk you through this because this falls into our scenario of that device lockdown. And I can show you some of the power that we have through MDM to control a modern mobile device. And in the future, we'll see similar features like this in big Windows, but definitely in the Windows 10 mobile experience. And so right here at the top, we're disabling Action Center. It's a great feature, but we don't want people to be able to swipe down from the top under lock screen. There's other CSPs that disable this, but we just want to disable Action Center altogether. It can be confusing to the user, some of the feedback that we have, so it's definitely something that we can change in here. And then here's where we get into the exciting part, is where we're actually deciding the only applications that we want to show in the UI. Not only are we deciding the only applications we want in the UI, we're also pinning them to the start. So a lot of feedback that we get is there's not a good imaging story for mobile devices. That's because a lot of the imaging goes on between mobile operators and OEMs, making sure that all the apps are in the right place. Depending on your scenario, this may be an answer for you. The problem with this, and the other feedback that we get, is once you write this kind of profile to a device, if you turn it off and turn it back on, it goes right back to the same way you configured it. So if you're thinking about sort of doing this is going to be someone's company phone, but it's also going to be sort of their daily use phone, you're sort of taking away the functionality of having it be very customizable, but for some customers, that's exactly what they want. So here are the three apps. The top one is IE, the middle one is Settings, and the bottom one there is Office. You can see to the right, I've got Office set as true for auto run, and I'll show you what that's going to look like. Basically what it means is when you start up the device, instead of going to the start screen, it's just going to auto launch that app. We have it set to Office on this device, but there's no reason that can't be your line of business app that you want your users to have for maybe an information worker role. And so moving on from that, we can also define how the buttons work. In this scenario, we're disabling them. You can see we've got the search button and the camera button, and you can do both press events and press and hold. Some of the feedback that we got from the field is that we also want to disable back. So for that single app experience, we didn't want anyone using back, and so we've actually added the functionality in GDR1 for Windows Phone 8 update to disable that, and these changes are going to be moving forward into the 10 timeframe. You can also remap buttons, so you can have a really cool experience where someone hits the search button and it launches your line of business app.
And so we're targeting these app GUIDs to include them in basically on the start screen. And then where we get those GUIDs is either A, through the store, or B, through the white paper.
Yes, or in the certain case where you can't find the GUID because we haven't published and documented it, you can go ahead and open a support case if you can't find the documentation, and we can go ahead and make that.
Right, so I think we actually have the app list. So these are all the settings. So you can find the GUIDs. Here we go. So these are just a few of the examples that you'll see here.
That is very small.
Yeah, let's zoom in on this. So this is in the white paper again. You'll find us saying that a lot. This is in the white paper. So it has a lot of the GUIDs of apps already on the device. And then for apps that are on the store, maybe not on the device already, you just go to Windows Phone Store. You can go to it in the browser and pick the GUID out of the URL. We'll show you how to do that in just a minute. Yep. But I'll let Mike continue with his assigned access talk.
So back to assigned access, one of the other things that you want with this type of scenario is to limit the number of settings that the user has. So you can do things like if you don't want VPN at all or you want to turn it on and make sure they don't turn it off, you can take it out of the UI. So from the device, you physically, when you go to settings, can't find it. It's simply out of the UI. This can get you into a sticky situation because if you do things like take out about and take out company account, you can't unenroll a device or you can't factory reset it through the UI. You have a question? Yeah, so Windows Phone 8.1 only supports one profile on a device, essentially. So when this writes, it's the entire device. Windows Embedded Handheld actually has the ability to have the 2 different users or 3 different users. And there's also, we can show you Apps Corner, which is sort of a localized way. That's our next demo. You're jumping ahead. And that sort of gives you a way to give that dual context to a device. But it's definitely feedback that we've got that we've fed back into the Windows Embedded Handheld team, which actually writes, which basically we take that and put it into phone. So we definitely hear that feedback very loud.
And one more
actually.
thing there is that, in that scenario where the user has one device and if the manager has a different device, we can, of course, target the different user groups with different sets of policies. So all the managers could have one set, the users could have a different. It could be different for, the user groups.
Wi-Fi can retarget using an NFC, for example. Two different NFC that own the
You're talking about for provisioning, for original provisioning? Yeah, so if you had, there's NFC provisioning added in later versions, and that's something we're going to see in Windows 10 as well. So you're saying you have two different, you'd have one data on one and one on the other. You have two devices. You do this, and it's provisioned. You go over here, and it's provisioned differently. Yeah, definitely. And the same story if you had an SD card. So you can also provision this through SD card, where you enter it in, and it loads up provisioning XML. Yes, that's very true. So enough with the boring XML, but it's a necessary evil, so you understand how awesome this actually is. Dave just turned on this virtual machine that's running phone, and it went straight into Office, as you saw in the XML. So it's auto-running Office right away. And if we go to the start screen, we can see these are the three apps that we specified. We have Settings, Internet Explorer, and Office. Something that's very, very key with this is that you want to also use this with an application allow and deny list, just in case the user finds a way to get to the store. So if they email themselves a link, stuff like that, as we mentioned, we're only taking it out of the UI. We're not uninstalling the apps or anything like that. So you will need additional policy to stop that. But it also creates a very cool story where you can still allow access to the store, send links, or put them through the company portal. So you have your company portal experience where you can click apps and install them, but the user can't go and install Angry Birds, Flappy Birds, any sort of bird-related games. And so if Dave will go ahead and click on Settings, I'll show you what the settings looks like. They can't remotely install. They cannot. Yeah, unless it's on your allow list or it's not one of the apps on your deny list. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But as you can see here, the settings app looks very different. We have Wi-Fi, VPN, workplace, feedback, and about, and that's it. So we won't have customers going in and doing any of the settings we don't want them to do.
And something else, Mike mentioned Wi-Fi earlier. So we can basically deny a user's ability to add additional Wi-Fi SSIDs, but we have provisioned our own here. So we can provision our company Wi-Fi, force the user to use this, and not allow them to connect to any other ones.
That can be a dangerous configuration for initial deployment. We have gotten users or companies who will go to deploy, and they say, I want this Wi-Fi profile, and I want to deny all other Wi-Fi profiles. And then they start getting that XML, and it goes, OK, cool, password, encryption, no other Wi-Fi, and it kills the connectivity. And then you can't get that managed Wi-Fi profile, and you're in a stuck state. So there's a couple ways around that. You can use, of course, cellular, if you have cellular on your devices. Another thing to do is stage the deployment so that you make sure you basically deploy the Wi-Fi profile, make sure you have 100% deployment and remediation, and then throw out the other policy to disable all Wi-Fi. Or those are probably the best ways to handle that situation.
Right. And that's only if you're deploying a Wi-Fi profile that doesn't work. If it is a functioning profile, then it'll work. But just make sure that you're testing this before we roll out the entire deployment, because you can get into situations like Mike mentioned where we're forcing them, they're Wi-Fi only devices, we're forcing them over one Wi-Fi profile, it doesn't work, and then we can't get any more policies to the device. So stage deployment, testing, all that kind of stuff can mitigate these scenarios.
The other time we run into this is in VPN profiles. So if you have a VPN profile that you're deploying to a device that's a full tunnel, meaning that all traffic from the device is going to go through the VPN profile, if it's certificate-based and that comes to the device before the certificate's there, it will actually get you in the same situation. That's a little easier because you can just turn the VPN, you can toggle VPN off, get the cert. You can use the certificate app, which we'll show later, to show that you actually have the cert on the device, and then turn VPN on. That's not a very good user experience, though, and that's a very long email to send to all of your users using Windows Phone. So in Intune, they've actually gone in and built in the logic where when you're creating your VPN profile, if you'd like to bring it up, while you're creating the VPN profile, you can select a certificate policy from SCEP that you've already deployed, and Intune is smart enough to know, okay, this guy has the cert already, I'm going to go ahead and turn around and I'm going to throw that VPN profile on that device. I'm going to go into the Intune UI.
All right. Here we go.
And if we exit out of that and go create a VPN profile, we'll show you guys where that box is. Because that is a high support ticket driver, because we do get the situation where, hey, we're rolling out VPN and it's not working. So it's actually, if you select certificates as your type, you can then select the certificate that you want that device to use when it connects over VPN.
Right. So that's when you have the certificate deployment piece all set up. We don't have it in this lab, but that's where you would set it up if you did. All right. So we're going to move on to our next demo.
Actually, our next scenario.
Yeah, next scenario. All right, application management. So this is huge for a lot of customers. In this scenario, we're going to be going over another fictitious company called Contoso Surveyors. So basically what Contoso does is they go from door to door, they collect political, demographic information, that sort of thing, bring it back to a central repository where they can run big data against it using Azure and all that great stuff to crunch the numbers and get some really great information from that data. So what's important to them is the line of business apps that are used to collect this data, right? This is the core competency of the company. They need these line of business apps to get the data from their users. So basically, they need to manage the app through the entire life cycle, from availability, deploying it, updating it, and then even retiring the applications at the end of the life cycle. Also, and this is very important, which is something that it was a very difficult scenario to overcome, and this is something that really happened, where some of these users were going into very rural areas where there might not be any network reception at all. So we might have to set up a new employee with a device, and he never has connectivity to our server at any point. So that's kind of an interesting configuration scenario, I'm sure. But with some new features on Windows Phone and Windows 10, we were actually able to provision these with SD cards and that sort of thing to get these users up and running, even if they've never connected in to that central server. All right, so we'll go into the kind of features that we're talking about here. First off, the Business Store portal. So in Windows Phone 8 today, the methods of application install are, if it's your app, your line of business app, you own it, you signed it and all the rest, you can force that install on your users. So you can require the install, it's going to install silently, they're not going to know anything about it, and that's just life for them. On the flip side, you can also make it available. So they can open your company portal, they can see that it's available, recommended, you can even kind of categorize, these are business apps, these are travel apps, you have some flexibility there. You can make that available experience for your users so they have the opportunity to choose what's right for them. As far as store apps, though, so we'll get asked about Lync, or I guess now Skype for Business, in the store app. Everyone uses it, everyone wants it on their devices, but since it's a store app, we can't force that install today. Windows 10, that story is changing. It's getting a lot better. Enterprises are going to have a lot more options through volume licensing and being able to deploy those kind of apps. Today, not as good of a story, but with Windows 10, that kind of central managing of store apps is coming to be as good as our managing of line of business apps today.
And for more information on that, there's actually a session going on right now on the Business Store portal in Windows 10. Essentially allows you to buy as a company, buy a number of licenses, deploy them to users. The user no longer works. You do a selective wipe. You get the license back. And it allows you, through the new identity solutions that we have in Windows 10, you can actually manage those third-party apps much, much more nicely than what you can do today.
Right. Very good points. Yeah, so if app management through the store is something that interests you, Business Store portal presentation, I forget the actual session number. But
I don't know the session number, but I know it's going on now. So when you guys get home or tomorrow, within 24 hours, it'll be up, and definitely check that out.
Right. All right, next piece. app locker, allow and deny lists. So this isn't like iOS or Android where you have to kind of take the app off the device if it's already there, reinstall it in a managed state. On Windows Phone, you can manage that app regardless of its state on the device. You don't really need any user interaction. You just push the policy from your server. The apps are managed. The apps are either denied, allowed, that whole scenario. So very important to combine that, especially with assigned access. Our last demo, we talked about denying apps and that sort of thing. So very important to make sure that our line of business apps, the apps that the users are using, are allowed, and then we're blocking stuff that maybe is a time waster or getting people off task, or maybe even a security vulnerability. Next, we already went over assigned access, but we will go over Apps Corner. So it's kind of a more localized version of assigned access. It's not quite as heavy-handed, and it can also be used to provision devices that haven't had any network connection to the server. And then again, speaking of no connection to the server, SD card provisioning for this type of scenario. So we have a demo.
And speaking of Windows 8.1 features moving into 10 and being still applicable, SD card provisioning, if you guys have seen any of the demos with WICD, that's going to move towards where you can use the same provisioning file for your Windows device, for your Windows mobile device, as well as your desktops and laptops and all that good stuff.
Right, so a few things that we've also enabled here are the deployment of an email profile. So basically the user, they log in, they enroll their device, they get that email profile, they get Wi-Fi, VPN, all that kind of network resource access stuff without having to configure it on their own. So we've deployed an email profile to these users because they're remote. Everyone uses email, right? So that's definitely a given there. We also have deployed a high security policy. Same stuff you've seen before. Maybe not quite as robust. We're not disabling camera. We're not disabling, copy paste. But just using that recommended security policy that you saw me create at the very beginning is going to be good enough in this kind of scenario.
In this scenario, we're focused more on the user experience than we are on actual security.
Right. These people need to be able to do their jobs first and foremost. So here I am under my time wasters policy. This is getting into the app locker, app management piece. So I blocked a few apps. You'll see Minecraft, Facebook, Halo, Spartan Strike are all on there. I'll show you how to grab these apps. I'm actually going to go to the Windows Phone store.
And again, if you haven't seen Intune since November, this is a new feature that was built in. So it's a little more easy. You don't have to go in and write your XML and all that stuff.
Right, so we can go ahead, grab one of these. We can grab Netflix, for example. And I mentioned earlier how to find GUIDs for apps. It's right there in the URL. So if you needed an app GUID for whatever reason, whether it's app allow, deny, or assigned access, whatever it is, it's right in the URL on the store. And then we can actually grab this and add it to our deny policy. So Netflix. Oops.
And so the difference between a deny policy and an allow policy. Allow policy, we say only these apps can run. Deny policy, we say these specific apps just can't run.
Right. Okay, so we have our deny list set up. We deployed it to only our users who are in the field. And then we need to worry about their apps, right? Their line of business apps and all the rest of it. So here you see that we've uploaded a couple of apps. The ssp.xapp is actually our company portal. That's where their central location where they're getting apps, where they're kind of interacting with the enterprise for that app management story. And then you'll also see 2 line of business apps. That's ClickMe version 1 and Shapes. All these apps, I guess besides Link, are available in the Intune trial tools. So again, that's something you just do a search for. Download the Intune trial tools. You'll get all these X apps, and then you can upload them to Intune. It's actually right here. So you just click on Apps, Add Apps. It'll launch a tool that lets you upload the apps, and then you can play around with them as you please. Here I've already had them uploaded, and I already have them deployed. So when I talk about deployment, I've deployed them to a few different groups. Again, everything's targeted at groups. And I've made this app available for our users. I could make it required because it's a line of business app, and I own it. But for this one in particular, I'm going to make it available. Also, you'll see uninstalls there and a few other options. So it's going to be available. ClickMe, on the other hand, this one's forced. So this is a critical app that's required user can't do anything about it. They're going to need to be using this app, so everyone's going to have it. Something else, basically the other scenario, is a store app. So we have all of our users have Lync available to them. Again, like we said, Business Store Portal, Windows 10, it's going to be better. But for Windows Phone 8 today, we can make it available through the company portal. And this actually lights up a pretty cool scenario where you have assigned access. They can't get to the store on their own. They can't even see it. But they can use the company portal for a kind of guided experience to the store. They can only get to the apps that you've kind of pushed through the company portal, and they can kind of have a very guided and limited Windows Phone store experience.
Just make sure that you put the company portal as well as your line of business apps both in your app restrictions policy as well as your assigned access policy. If it's going to be deployed later, you can still pin it, and when it becomes installed on the device, it'll show up on the start screen.
Right. So here we are on our device. You'll already see something a little bit interesting. Facebook's grayed out. The app has been disabled, and I didn't have to uninstall it and then reinstall it through the portal, anything like that. I just enrolled the device. I'm getting access to stuff on the enterprise side through VPN and email and resource access, all this stuff, but I'm also, having attack vectors kind of taken away. So it's a give and a get, right? For users, they're going to get access to things, but you're also going to, take away some things that maybe don't make sense for the organization. In this case, Facebook. And then if we go to the store, and I believe Minecraft was on there as well. If we went to here, you'll see this app is not available for your device.
Should go and zoom in on that guy.
Yeah, I can zoom in here.
It's a little dark.
Ooh, actually, well, because this is a phone, I have to drag it over here and then zoom it from here. All right, so this app's not available for your device. Disabled from the store. All right, so now,
And that way you still get updates for the apps that are installed on the store, where if you disable the store altogether, you're not going to get any app updates, but also not able to install any apps.
right. And then if you guys remember, ClickMe was a forced install. So we already see it showing up on the device. Doesn't do a whole lot, I will admit. Not too many features here. But the point is, we were able to require this install. We were able to silently push this to a device, get it up and running. And other line of business apps are going to be kind of the same scenario. So I actually have to log in here. So I'm going to put a logo over my password for just a moment.
And something else to note is in the past, you guys have probably, if you've used Intune or have deployed apps to Windows Phone, you'll know about the Symantec cert that was required for using Intune with the solution. That's since changed. Back in November, they took that requirement out. If you're not going to be deploying apps, you don't need to buy the certificate. You can actually, it will download a company portal that will customize once it comes to the device through the store. If you are deploying apps, though, you will need the Symantec cert. If you're already there and you don't want to use it anymore, open a support ticket with the Intune team at the current time.
Right. So basically, there's the company portal that's pushed from Intune, and there's the company portal in the store. One is for you want to be managing your apps, you want to be deploying apps, that kind of thing. That's through Intune, Symantec cert. If you're just worried about policy, not all this app management stuff, just get the company portal through the store, and we just worry about your policies. So I said we would show you these apps through the company portal, and here we are. So we have some different categories that you can configure on your own, but I want to show you the apps. So as far as Lync is concerned, this takes us to the store. Again, we don't own the app. It just takes us here. But this is what I was talking about when I was saying it can be a guided experience. So we can take the store out of the UI. The user can't get there except through our company portal, right? So we're giving them a guided experience where we can point them at specific apps in the store based on what we want them to use. And this is still going to be available in Windows 10, but there will be more options for management of store apps. As far as our line of business app, we have the option to install it right here. So we don't have to worry about the store. We don't have to worry about any of that. Actually, it looks like this is frozen.
Oh, the display's just
Oh, there you go. So you'll see install is there an option. We don't have to go to the store and go ahead and bother with that. We can install the app directly from here. All right. Something else.
The final demo for this scenario.
Final demo.
Second to last demo.
Second to last demo. So something that when we're talking about data protection and users on the road, we want to make sure that their content's secure. So something that we can use in addition to Intune, it's part of the EMS suite or Enterprise Mobility Suite, and that's RMS, rights management. So this message is actually rights management protected. I've given it some rules, some policies that this specific email can't be opened on this device. But you can also do things like encrypting documents so only certain people can use them, encrypting documents and making them expire after a certain amount of time, or you even have something like a kill switch where you can send a document to a bunch of people, not even necessarily in your organization, people external. It's encrypted, it's protected, and then as soon as you want that file to disappear, you can hit that kill switch. Document is never able to be opened again. So a lot of really cool features and functionality that you can light up with rights management. And that's part of the EMS suite that comes with Intune, rights management, Azure AD Premium. Something really cool and something that we've seen a lot of excitement about. I think it turned 1 year old yesterday.
EMS is 1 year old yesterday.
Yeah. Happy birthday, EMS.
And this is all delivered through the email profile that came through MDM. So you get the email profile that comes from Azure AD. All authentication using Intune is all handled by whatever you already have up in Azure Active Directory. So if you already have Office 365 already deployed, it's an easy step.
Definitely. So last demo.
Last demo is, if you look on the left, there's the XML from Assigned Access. Should look familiar by now. But that's kind of hard to set up if you're going from scratch. So we're going to show you Apps Corner on this device.
Right. All right, let's see if I can get...
Dave's going to be using Project My Screen, which is an app that you can use when you're tethered. You can also use it with Miracast.
All right, so here I am. You'll see this is just a wired device. It's just tethered here with Project My Screen, so I'm doing this live. Going to all settings. This is a managed device. I'm going to search for Apps Corner.
And we talk about taking feedback from customers and building it into the product. That's where this feature came from, is this very specific customer scenario that we had.
Right.
Similar to the scenario we're sharing.
Yeah, exactly. So they needed people to go out into the field. They needed a lockdown experience. They needed a limited and focused experience. But they also needed to enable that without connection to the server necessarily.
No MDM.
So you can select apps that are on the device. I've selected a few here that you'll see. And then we also have a few more options. We turn Action Center on and off, turn settings on and off, and we have some more options. So if you have really good memory and can remember that huge XML about assigned access, all of these were settings that were in that XML. So whether we're deploying it from the cloud, from our server, or deploying it here, it's all the same features. It's just kind of lit up in a different way.
And the nice thing about that, too, is it does use a separate user context, as Dave will show once we launch it. So you can actually pin, change where things are pinned, and then you can launch Apps Corner, and it's going to go into this sort of protected experience.
Right. And one really cool thing here is the export to SD card that you see down at the bottom. So we can export this kind of configuration to our SD card in the phone and take that SD card device to device to device and provision them all without having that remote connection.
The other thing we can do is take that same micro SD card, plug it into a PC, pull the XML off. Needs a little bit of massaging, but essentially the best part about it is that it gives you the pin location, so you don't have to worry about configuring the start screen and all that stuff. You can then pull that, push it into MDM, and send it out to all the managed devices.
All right, so here we are. We're going to deploy our Apps Corner configuration. And, not the prettiest thing, but we can, the user has the ability to kind of move this around on their own, make it their own, and they have the ability to do that. So very lockdown experience. You see I'm trying to swipe over to the app list. It's not there. We do have, the Action Center in this example, but you could disable it. And even if we do get the settings, it's very limited, as you can see. So not everything there. And then to get out of it, we swipe right. So this is what Mike was talking about in that dual user kind of scenario. It's similar to Windows Embedded Handheld, where I can have the assigned access kind of identity or the Apps Corner identity, and then I can type in a password and get back to this kind of elevated mode where we have the full feature set of the device.
We've seen this also in sort of a point of sales solution where someone will have an app that manages point of sales in a store, and they can take their personal device, have the app on there, put it into Apps Corner mode, hand it around to the different store employees, have them do purchases, things like that, and then at the end of the day, they can go back into their regular phone.
Right. Okay, so that about wraps it up, I believe.
Well, that all looks great when it's working.
Very true.
But what could possibly go wrong? Not like that was intense configuration or anything like that, but this breaks quite often. First thing we're going to talk about is trouble with custom settings. These OMA URI settings can be a bit difficult to get used to using. The first problem is tattooing the device. This is something that we've been working on to make it a little less likely, but Intune has a lot of built-in logic on when to deploy devices, when not to deploy policies, what policies work and won't work. When you do things like custom URI settings, you're sort of taking that into your own hands. So, for example, if you go through the custom URI setting to make an allow list, in order to take that off in the future, you can't really just go issue a delete. You'd have to basically write a small deny list that only denies one app that you don't expect anyone to ever use, and then go ahead and deploy that to the devices, because you can only overwrite, can't delete, because you are sort of going into this custom territory. As I mentioned earlier, the slightest typo will result in a remediation error. I'm not going to read that error off, but that's what you'll see in your Intune console. Basically, it'll send the policy. The device says, I know the CSP, but I don't know what you're trying to tell me to do. Either the data type's wrong, there's a typo in the URI string, or the data itself isn't what the device is expecting, and it'll kick back and say, I can't remediate this, I can't make this change. And of course, misconfigurations, that's sort of what we were talking about earlier. If you create your own VPN profile, you're taking that sort of into your own hands. So if you don't specify all the settings, that the VPN profile might write to the device, you open it in VPN and it might crash the UI, things like that. All stuff we've seen support tickets for. And all stuff that you might run into when you start going into Windows 10 and you start taking these custom URIs into your own hands.
Right, but definitely something that the white paper can help you guys with. We call out a lot of easy pitfalls like, forgetting the settings, or maybe like Mike mentioned earlier, not deploying the certificate first for the VPN to connect and that sort of thing. So, make sure if you're deploying to the VPN CSP, you read through the CSP, see what it does, see what kind of pitfalls we've called out for there, and just test it first.
Definitely test.
Kind of what we're getting to is that, before you roll this out to your entire enterprise, the VPN profile, Wi-Fi profile, whatever, make sure it works. Because if you're forcing your users to use one type of network connection, for that really locked down scenario, you might lock down your users out of having a usable device. So just be very careful.
So another major call driver we get is enrollment issues. Essentially, this is the part of the experience that requires the most user interaction. This is how they essentially set themselves up to get all the policies, all the apps, all the good stuff. So there's 4 steps to the enrollment process. There's discovery, authentication, enterprise application token install, and device management provisioning, so getting the first policies. So the first step of that, discovery. This is our most common issue just because it's the first issue. Some people who hit this won't get past it. But basically what this is, as you can see on the screen, that at Contoso, that gets pulled off, and the phone goes and runs a discovery to try and find what the management endpoint is. If you're using a trial account where your UPN is your tenant name .onMicrosoft, this won't be a problem because that's an Intune and the phone will check that. If you're using something like your own domain, you do have to go through, and there's guides on how to create your DNS record so that when you hit that domain and it says, okay, I'm looking at contoso.com, it looks at enrollment.contoso.com, and then you point that to the MDM service that you're using. So for Intune, you point it to manage.microsoft.com. If you do get into the state where the phone can't resolve that DNS, for this situation, you can go ahead and try and enter the server address as manage.microsoft.com. You'll also see this exact same error message if you just don't have device connectivity. The next step in the enrollment process is authentication and certificate install. So we enter our name. That server prompt won't show up unless it fails. So hopefully it successfully takes you to the management service. This is hitting Azure Active Directory authentication. So if you're using ADFS, if you're using a third-party federated service, if you're using multi-factor authentication, that's a screen you're going to get. This is the other place where we see a lot of volume because if you don't have that working correctly in your infrastructure, you're not going to be able to log in and become a managed device through Intune. It generally looks like the best way to identify it is it tells you you don't have a username or password. If ADFS is sort of not working, you might go to a broken page, something like that. Probable cause here looks like a password prompt. Go ahead and just go to portal.manage.microsoft.com, and that's the best way to test to make sure that it's not the actual enrollment service, to just see if it is your Azure Active Directory authentication failing.
Right, and it can also be Azure Active Directory that you log into. It could be Office 365. Any of those cloud services that are all using that Azure backend. Just log in, make sure your credentials are okay, make sure the password is what you thought it was, and rule out any of those kind of account-specific issues.
And then the next step in the process, basically what happens is if you're deploying applications, you have this signed AET token, or application enrollment token. What this does is it creates a trust between the device and the management service. And so this allows you to run those third-party apps or your LOB apps. And this one is pretty rare, but when we see an error here, it'll say something like, we weren't able to set up your account on this phone. There's really two probable causes here. This means that we found the management service, it can verify who we are, but something happened in the process of becoming enrolled that was an issue. What we see here is if the certificate used to create that application enrollment token has expired, this will fail. We saw this with Intune Trial Tool about a year ago, where the application, where we were getting calls where the cert wasn't updated, and that way when people tried to create this trust, it couldn't create the trust because it couldn't validate the cert. The other issue you can see with this is where you'll get to when it'll say this user is not licensed in Intune. The two ways to check that is if you're using Intune standalone, go ahead and log into the Intune account portal, so account.manage.microsoft.com. You can go in and find the user and make sure that they're enabled for Intune. If you're using Configuration Manager for the hybrid scenario, just make sure that that user is in the proper collection that is set up for enrollment. And finally, the last step is the first time you get provisioning. Generally, the only time we see this fail is if you're putting a policy on the device that's going to basically destroy the network connection. So if you're disabling Wi-Fi and you start enrolling, it's going to get that policy, and then it's going to stop syncing, and you're not going to get the rest of the policy. So that's generally what we see here. Something to point out is this is within the Settings Workplace menu, where you can see the manual sync at the bottom and the trash can at the bottom for unenrolling. But you'll see the last successful connect to the server equals none. And that's basically saying that we can't get policy. And that second part that says that we're trying, that's important because that says, hey, we're trying, but for some reason, maybe it's a firewall, maybe it's something else, we just can't get to manage.microsoft.com if it's Intune, or it could be a third-party MDM server. We just can't get there and get our policy. But there are ways you can troubleshoot this, additional ways. So if you do hit an outlier, something we didn't cover, there's some great apps that we've created in the Windows team to help basically troubleshooting. There's some self-help and some that just helps us when you call into support.
Right, so the first one that we're going to talk about is Field Medic. Both of these apps, including Field Medic, are on the store. You can download them today. Nothing new there. They're also going to be available on Windows 10 mobile and Windows 10 in general, but they'll be more helpful in the mobile scenario. So for Field Medic, basically what it does is it allows you to collect a set of ETLs, ETL tracing, for a bunch of different things, from networking to network logging to application deployment, OMA-DM stuff, all this sort of thing. Now here's the bad part. Unfortunately, most of it isn't available to you guys. This is internal stuff that we have to use Manifest to translate. However, being mobile, being Windows Phone, or being Windows 10 mobile, networking is hugely important, right? We have remote devices. Networking is where all this management's happening. Anyone can basically record a net logging trace, open it up in Wireshark or Network Monitor or anything like that, and then parse that network trace from the device. So, if it's just like a Windows 10 desktop, okay, that might not sound very exciting because you can just do that already. But if it's a Windows Phone or a Windows 10 mobile, you can't just collect a network trace today. But with Field Medic, you can. So I'll show you how to do that in just a minute. The next one is the Certificates app. So if you're using certificates for authentication, for that strong 2 factors of auth, that we're seeing more prevalent these days with security being top of mind. Certificates app is the way where you can check the app to verify certificate trust chaining. You can make sure that all the trust certificates haven't, nothing's expired, nothing's been revoked. Also, if you're deploying certificates to the device, you can make sure they're in that personal store. So you can verify that cert is actually getting to the store, and that a cert is actually, and the correct cert is getting to the store. And you can check this device side. So I said I would show you how to do it, and I'm going to go through that right now.
It was a huge piece of feedback that we got because in the Windows 8, not 0.1 time frame, it was a massive, massive call generator where people would say, I think I installed the cert, but I have no way of telling.
Yeah, there used to not really be a good way. So it was just really, really hard to troubleshoot. You didn't know if it was there, didn't know what the issue was. So it was very difficult. So in here, you can see I do have a certificate in my personal store, something that has been deployed. You'll see MS Organization Access is the friendly name. You can see some alternative names. I mean, this is all stuff that's normal for Windows users to go and check in MMC, but on a phone, this is not something you've been able to do before. You can also email the certificate at the bottom, or at least the details of the certificate. Right. So this is kind of a status or warning that you might see, in your own environment if something's not going right. We also have the intermediate and root stores. So, if we're having issues building that chain of trust to a trusted root, you can make sure it's all in here. And this is stuff that you can deploy to the device, deploying certificates to the root store, to the intermediate store, to make sure that all your certificate chaining is going okay. All right, now to Field Medic. I will make a note, you cannot delete certificates. I know.
Another piece of feedback that we get.
It's rough. We hear that all the time, people want to,
You can go and revoke the certificate from your CA?
Yeah, so basically what you would have to do is you have to revoke it from your CA or reset the device. If you've deployed the certificate via SCEP, basically Intune combines with SCEP and NDES to deploy certificates over the air, you can take off that profile in Intune, and Intune will take the certificate off the device.
Or a selective wipe.
Or a selective wipe. So if you're using SCEP, you have a little bit more of options. If you're using another method, like you can attach the PFX file to an email, send it to the device, and import it that way, you're kind of on your own because Intune's not aware of that cert on the device. So it's going to have to be a reset. In Windows 10, again, this is kind of the theme, right? It's going to be better. There are going to be more ways to deploy certificates, more ways to manage them on the device. It's going to be easier. You won't necessarily need SCEP to have that managed certificate scenario.
And that's all based on feedback that we get from the deployments. People are saying, hey, this is great. We love the product. We love using Intune. However, we really need this to unblock our scenario.
Exactly. All right, so here we are in Field Medic. If you go under Advanced, you'll see Net Logs. And I'm going to turn this on. So that's the important part. As far as these categories, these are just collecting various ETLs. But this isn't the useful part to you guys. That's the useful part to us. We have the manifest to translate it. We're having conversations around how to make that available to the public, but we're not quite there yet. So I'm going to go ahead and start logging. Here we go. Report session in progress. Cool.
And so if you call into support with an issue and we sort of get to the point where we need ETL tracing, we'll essentially send you steps on how to run this.
All right, so here are windowsphone.com. Get back to our tracing tool. Stop that trace. All right. Oops. Tiny keyboard. All right. And now, I'll show you what that looks like over here.
And this is through USB tether that you can actually access these reports.
Let me redo the tether.
You can also save it locally and then go into the Files app, find the file, and email it. Or upload it to OneDrive or whichever
Right.
Whichever methods you have.
Here we have our collection of files that we've collected in our trace. And we're going to go ahead and open the netlog. Not to be confused with networking, that one won't work, but netlog does. And that will open with your network parsing tool of choice. So Network Monitor, Wireshark, that sort of thing. Might take a minute, but hopefully it'll get there.
And then you
Here
can
we
sort
go.
of do your own troubleshooting, a little bit of self-service troubleshooting before you actually go ahead and call support.
Right, so I went to, let's see, windowsphone.com, and you can see some of these DNS requests right there. So I'm not lying, it actually does work. You can take network tracing from your device in case you're troubleshooting these kind of device management scenarios, and you want to make sure that, is the policy coming down? Are we talking to the server okay? All that sort of stuff. Networking is super important in those scenarios. All right.
That's the last of our demos. We have questions here. We highly encourage you, if you guys have questions, head over to Yammer. Use hashtag BRK2301. That's for our session. We'll be monitoring that for the next month or so. If you guys go back and you're like, oh yeah, this is this. I want to go ahead and see that again. Or I have a quick question for these guys. Go ahead and reach out to us on Yammer. Let's see. Again, I'm Mike Donosky. This is David Alessi.
David Alessi.
And definitely please fill out an evaluation for the session. Let us know how we did. And by now, hopefully, some of you who have deployed Windows Phone, I guess firsthand I see if someone wants to share a success story on your Windows Phone. We got one back there I saw first. Okay. Depends on what you're wanting to do. If you're going to be managing, okay, the question was, is there still a requirement for the Exchange connector? It is still required if you're using Intune and you want to deploy email profiles.
And it's on-prem Exchange. If you're using like Office 365 Cloud Exchange, there's no. But basically, you use Azure AD on the back end for the tenant, and then you light up Intune, light up Office 365, and then you can deploy the profiles that way.
Great. All right.
Yeah.
Oh,
all right.
Go ahead and
hear
use the
it.
microphone, please.
Yeah, so everyone can hear.
Yeah, I work. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I work for a software company, but I volunteer on the side as a football and wrestling coach at the local high school.
Cool.
Awesome.
The school district recently standardized on Surface tablets in all the classrooms, but all the coaches that I work with, they have their own iOS, Android phones, et cetera.
Right. Right.
It was when they standardized on Surface tablets, they became familiar with the user interface, and they're using all these different applications, and they didn't work as well with their Android and iOS tablets. So I convinced the school to invest in Windows Phone devices because they're not going to carry tablets out on the field with them.
Right.
And so there's now a plethora of Windows devices on the school campus. Kids are starting to adopt them now because they see their teacher and their coaches using them.
Very
And
cool.
so it's really cool because now they could easily transition from what they do in the classroom to what they do on the field.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Are you guys managed by Intune or MDM or anything like that?
The school district, yeah, it does. So
Cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, cool. So, awesome story. Actually, just
very
come up
cool.
when we're done here. We'll do a few more questions and pick up your HP
thanks for the
Stream
story.
7. Have any other questions? We have a few more minutes.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm just looking at all these tools and they're all going into some organization that's just doing straight System Center. What capabilities do they have for management of the Windows 10 devices?
So for Windows 10 devices, you can still use ConfigMan. If you're using a mobile device that's not domain joinable, so that's the big differentiation. If it's not domain joinable, you will have to use some sort of MDM service, whether it's Intune. You can use the Intune connector to tag Intune into ConfigMan, and that way you don't have to go out to Internet Explorer and go to manage.microsoft.com for all your policies. You can do it. Yep, it's the hybrid solution.
Exactly, yep.
And if you've been paying attention to Intune in the past six months to a year, we've been focusing a lot on building a lot of features into standalone. And in the future, you're going to see more features come back in a hybrid. So we're
Right.
looking for parity first, and then expanding.
Yeah.
Have another question?
Yeah, so I heard you say that you still can't revoke certificate.
Can.
People on 10
You can revoke certificates. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. You can't delete them through the certificates app, but you can go to your certificate authority
Yeah,
and revoke
it also depends on how they're deployed, right? So if you're using, there are different methods, right? So in Windows Phone 8 today, there are two ways, right? So there's like the manual way. You export the PFX, you email it to the device, or get it on there, whatever way you want, and then import it that way. That's unmanaged. So that's that scenario where it can't really take it off easily, besides revoking it from your CA or resetting the device. If it's SCEP, it is managed. So Intune would be able to pull that profile off with a selective wipe, just taking the enterprise stuff off of the device. In Windows 10, we're bringing more options in addition to those two that will also, be able to take certificates off and have more management capability.
Great.
Yeah,
All right,
we've definitely heard that plenty of times.
And we've run over. So guys, thank you all very much for coming. Again, reach out on Yammer if you have any questions, or open a support case, I guess.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.